Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stream. Today we are looking at a brand new plugin from Kazrog, same guys that make the Thermionik plugins, and this is called True Iron. I didn't really know what was going to be going on with this plugin. It was just kind of dropped, so it's been some sort of super secret collaboration. So without further ado, we'll be looking at the True Iron plugin. Now this is a kind of a sneak peek at a whatchamacallit. It's a project that I've been working on. You may have seen the video that I did comparing loads of different VST guitar amps, including one of the Thermionik ones. And I've been working on doing some more amps in there and some real amps. So I'm going to pull that project up, and I've decided to use the True Iron plugin on a load of this kind of stuff. So I'm using an Audient ID4, which I would pull out to show you here, and that's my main kind of interface today. I was going to use an Audient ID22, which I've got, which is very, very powerful. And then I didn't have time to set it up, because if I was going to do that, go big or go home, I have an ID44 to play with. Ooh. So videos for both of those are coming in the next few weeks. Got a couple of absolute monsters there to play with, and I've got to say, they are fantastic interfaces to work with. So that means I'm Audient converted. Without further ado, I'm going to go over to this screen, which you may need to watch this on a sizable screen to be able to see everything that's going on. God only knows, I just spent half an hour with tech issues trying to get all of this nice and sharp, and so you could hear all the audio nice and clear. If there's any issues at any point, feel free to say in the chat. This is live, by the way, so if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. That's how that works, right? So, this project is a rendition of the good old theme song, and it's got lots and lots of True Iron in here. So let's turn all these off and see how this sounds, True Iron. I used it on everything. And then we're going to have a listen. So this is how it sounds as a normal project. And I'm going to start turning on all these True Irons. Instantly just sounds bigger and better. So without further ado, let's reveal True Iron. There aren't many controls here, which is great. What True Iron does, as I've had it explained to me, I was talking to the guy from Kazrog, Shane McPhee, earlier. We had a bit of a conversation about this plugin, and what it is it's a set of transformers. Now, personally, I love the sound of transformers. It's my thing in terms of audio. Because if you think of saturation, it's hard to describe saturation. You think distortion, you think that kind of overly distorted thing. And generally what you would do to get that is you would use something like a microphone preamp or a guitar amp. And most of those have got tubes in which impart their own sound. They've got a whole circuit around them which imparts its own sound, and the harder you push it, the more you get the sound of that circuit. This is a plugin that's been designed with a guy called Devin Powers, who's a big enthusiast in the kind of custom transformer industry. And I really, as soon as I saw this, thought this could be my jam. I mean, this isn't going to be something you would do an entire mix with, as it were, but this is something I would have on a lot of tracks. So let's have a look at what this is doing, because it's very subtle using a transformer, unless you want it not to be. So let's listen to, say, the kick drum without True Iron on. In fact, let's just use the bypass in the plugin. So I've got a nice solid kick going on there. As soon as I turn on True Iron, you hear that difference? Off and on. it's got more weight, it's got more low end. I mean, your argument there could be, well, why don't you just add some more low end into your EQ? But this is doing a very different thing to that. It's probably easier to show you the difference if I was to, say, solve the entire drum bus and put another True Iron on the entire drum bus, because there's then more going on at once with me pressing one button to show a bigger change. So with this turned off on all the drums, I'll turn it on. And I'll push the strength. The strength pushes how non-linear the transformer is, which is to say how much the transformer is doing something other than giving us a perfect sound. So, like, turn this off. Now, it sounds louder, and on the meters it may be a touch louder, but it's not designed to be a volume increase. If you've ever used a really good guitar amplifier, a big reason that those guitar amps sound good is because of the transformers that are inside them. Now, transformers, let's just have a quick conversation about what they are, what they do. A transformer is, in electrical terms, it's a big block of iron, usually, with two sets of copper wires around it, which don't touch. So a signal goes in one side and is passed through the big iron magnet, or it may be something slightly different from iron, and it's received on the other side. And the two sides electrically never touch. The reason for that, well, you can use it in loads of different applications, but it disconnects one connection from the other. Now, if you have that set as what's called a unity transformer, so if you have the same number of wines on one side as the other, then that transformer's sole purpose is to make sure that the electrics don't ever touch. If you have more windings on one side than the other, then interesting things start to happen, because then you get more signal on one side or more voltage on one side, and that you can use them in power. Like, if you've got an American guitar amp and you're using in Europe, you would use a power transformer, which means that you can then get mains that works with it. If you're using transformers in audio, it's usually to avoid noise and hiss and background hum and all that kind of stuff. If you've ever got an isolator, then that's usually got a transformer in it that does this. One of the upsides to particularly good transformers is they add a particular sound which we like, and that's what this is doing. So, there we go. So if we go from this fairly limp drum sound, this is at maximum, so this is showing you what this does at full blast. And on. This is the USA transformer, because there's a switch here. If I hit that switch, that changes the skin of the plugin, which is how it looks, because there are two different sounding transformers on here that impart a different kind of tone. Shush. Baby messages going everywhere. Bah. And the Euro one apparently is a little more transparent. Let's turn that on and off. And the USA one sounds a little thicker. Now the strength, yeah, it models how non-linear the transformer is, because you can get theoretically perfect transformers, and there are companies like Lundahl make these transformers that are about as sonically accurate as you can get, and they're usually used in like really hi-fi applications, and that's cool. And if you're using transformers in a situation where you really want the sound not to be affected, that's the way to go. But a lot of the older style transformers, they didn't work perfectly, at least within their range, and they would then saturate, especially in the audio kind of field. one of the best known transformer based preamps, the Neve 1073. The main reason that Mr. Neve himself reckons that his preamps sound really good is because they somehow hit upon a theoretically ideal sound from those transformers, which wasn't what they were going for, which is what I find really interesting. And it just so happened to sound great. So that's where the if you push too much audio into a transformer, it starts to sound nicer if it's a transformer that does. I mean, if you get cheap transformers, usually like Chinese ones, they start to sound pretty horrible pretty quickly. But in this kind of circumstance, the two that have been modelled are good sounding ones. I think that's very much the point. Devon Powers has made boxes that have got like inputs and outputs pre-wired with these big chunky transformers in for engineers like Sylvia Massey and lots of big name engineers where you want that kind of sound, but it's quite hard to find. Like old RCA transformers, things like that, that just aren't made anymore, unless you get someone to make them as a one-off at a prohibitive cost. So why not do it in software? Now, this is where we've already basically covered half this plugin, talking on drums, but we'll listen to what it does now that I've talked at length. Something that's really interesting is the crush, because the crush with the Unity switch, and I'm sure Shane, I think he's watching, if Shane from Kazrog sees me say anything wrong, hopefully he'll correct me, but the crush pushes more level into that transformer. So let's listen to the drums as I crush them. Can you hear at full strength and full normal crush that kick drum suddenly sounds damaged? It sounds thick. I mean, if for certain sources that might be what you want out of this plugin, for certain sources it might not. But it's interesting that because I tend to run all my mixes, all my channels at relatively kind of analog levels, they don't come in too hot usually. It's not doing that much. Let's turn that off again. So this is off. And on. And off. So you can probably hear now that there's a difference there, and that's with using one copy of True Iron that's heavily crushed. Now if I take that back down to 0, there's a little button that says ×2. If I tick that button, that will now, instead of it being 24, that'll be up to 48 dB, and we will really hear this now. So I'm going to hit play and start to crank this. Oh, there we go. So here's bypassed again. And I'll back the strength off a bit here. And crush it more. Now that's really starting to add the kind of distortion as well, if you want to use this as a distortion box. This is a kind of distortion that I like, that's not like, say, guitar amp distortion where you've got 5 cascaded tubes and it just sounds like mush. This is where the mix control will start to come in handy. Because, say, that drum sound now is practically, in my opinion, relatively unusable. But if we back the mix off to 0% and then add some of that in, suddenly I can have like half the original signal and half that really crushed signal. I'll bypass that. Now, that's been crushed so hard that I think the level seems to be dropping. So that's where this unity and boost knob comes in. If I turn the boost on and crush this instead this way. And then blend that into the mix. So this is it on its own, nice and gentle and blended. Let's try this on the Euro transformer. So if you're into, I don't know, like indie rock or it's if you're into that kind of heavy, what does it sound like if you run a compressor after it at 2 times crush? That would sound like a monster. Let's put Virtual Mix Rack in and get the monster compressor going. So let's get that 50%ed. So this is on its own. And this is so that sounded like an absolute beast now. What I might want to do in that kind of mix was bring the snare out quite a lot, because where it was hitting before, it's not now. Let's listen to that with the bass together. So this was it before, but obviously with a much louder snare. And here's it now. And yeah, of course that compressor afterwards that I've just been requested by Kirby Wood, that seems to, oh, I activate the punch button as well. But yeah, if that's your kind of thing, we've gone from relatively clinical, relatively sterile drums to something that's much more of a monster. So let's move on, let's listen to this on bass, because there is a True Iron on the bass already. What's after it? So we've got a bit of compression going on, quite a big 3K pop out. Not a lot else, that's my bass tone. So this is it before. Fairly clean. Let's push this really hard. Ooh. I'm going to try the Euro. So 0%. Ooh, yeah. So that's it without it. It sounds a little anemic now to my ears. And with, I think I'm going to go in here, add a little low end to my bass, maybe take out some 40 hertz. Bass with the push, with the crush style. Let's have a look. Let's crush the bass. Yeah, as I suspected, when you push some sources, especially ones with too much low end too far, they start to really decay in. So if I... If that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for like a Doom kind of sound where you really want to get that extra destruction, then hey, that's where to go. But I'm going to keep the crushing around 20 dB here. And mix this with the drums. Now that's sounding really good. Let's look at the guitar amps without the True Iron. In fact, yes, so that's my guitar bus that's got... Let's just look at this, because this project... Oh, behave yourself. The number of amps here is silly. I've got the PRS Archon, PV Revolver, 7170 there, Helix Native, which I got a trial of, the Thermionik Psycho A, Bias Amp 2, L'Ecstasy, TSE, Emissary, Heavy 5150, the Nick Crow, TH3. Oh my word, yes, so many. Your demo expires in 3 days, but that's okay because I've already done what I wanted to do with it. Amplitude, I got the PV amps in, yeah. So I've been going crazy. So, yeah, so the sweet spot around 3 o'clock, yeah, on the bass, on my signal, on the sound I was giving it, sure. But that's what's interesting about transformers and input levels and all that kind of thing, is it really depends on what you feed it. If you give it something, it will respond in kind. Now, so I'm using 2 Notes Wall of Sound with my own cabinets, buy our stuff, and I'm using a Zilla 4x12 with an SM57 and a 2x12 Fat Boy with a 421, but I am using those on a real, what? See, I've also captured a load of real amps, that's what all these channels are. So that's going to be another video as well, ladies and gents. I just need to get around to editing all this. So I used a PV6505, a Marshall TSL100, PV Windsor, and I used the 2 Notes lead, but I also tried that on its own and through loads of different power sections. So this is that through... This is a 2 Notes lead through a real Mesa 5050 power amp. And it sounds like this. Cool, so that's not using a real amp either, that's using Wall of Sound. I ran it through a real tube amp and used the 2 Notes captor to capture that. And that means that, you know, I didn't have to make any noise whilst doing it. And there we go. So the EQ is doing nothing. There's a mix bus from Slate that's doing almost nothing. That's a Neve setting. What else have we got? Wall of Sound, and that's it. So let's listen to this with True Iron on it. So here's without. And here's with. Talk about bringing it to life. Let's play with the strength while that's on. Yeah, so the strength really high up on these guitars is really kind of pushing the mids forward, but also when it goes chug chug, it's letting the low end kind of breathe. In fact, I heard that the most when I was playing around with this yesterday on this section, which has kind of stabs and silence. So if I turn the crush all the way off. And then really push that up. Here we go. Nearly managed to swallow my own head. The thing about anything like this is there's always going to be a sweet spot. And for me, that sweet spot is generally where you can hear that life coming into it, but it's not killing the signal. And yeah, so I'm running it pretty hot. So let's have a listen to this with the Euro on it again, because I was advised that the Euro one's more kind of gentle and bypassed. And on. And USA. Yeah, that's my tone. So let's bring the drums and the bass back in. I'll just turn off True Iron on the guitars. They get lost. That sounds organic. See, this is fantastic. I may not use this on every channel, but so far, on just the buses, this is doing something that I've always liked. I've always been a fan of those kind of thicker, more saturated mixes. I was always a fan of guys like Rick Rubin. I've always been a big Rick Rubin fan. But if you listen to any mixes that Rick Rubin's done, you're sitting with a pad and paper going, this is wrong, that's wrong, this sounds terrible, this is awful, what are you doing? Yet when I listen to this, I really like it. Why do I really like it? And it's things like transformer saturation, because I know for a fact that Rick Rubin cranks all of the channels on all of his analog desks and all that kind of stuff. He just pushes everything, and it just gets this hard to describe warmth. It's not necessarily just all out distortion. It's just a thickening. So now for the bit that makes my skin crawl, but is kind of necessary to round out a demo like this, and that's vocals. So here's the track with a vocal which has the transformer in line before the compressor and the EQ and everything, because that's where I would probably have all the transformers in an audio path. I would have them kind of at the preampy stage, so early on. In fact, one of the reasons that the 1176 compressor is one of the most famous compressors is that the early models have really good transformers in, so when you drive them pretty hard, it does this as well as its compression job. So, onward. And off. Hey, where are you headed now? And on again. Wait until the child comes forth and takes you into the clouds. Now, it's subtle, but on vocals especially, and I'm gonna crush this a bit harder, and something happens to vocals with transformers, and the way I describe it is the transformer sings. It's... yeah. Nothing electronic can by definition ever sound organic. Well, it's a word we use. Of course it can't sound literally organic. It's all electronic, but I think organic is a word I would use to describe something like this, to describe how the things that are saturating react in real time to what you're doing. It's kind of... organic is the word I would use in audio terms as the opposite of static, because the word dynamic is very much taken by describing loudness and quietness. So for me, that's its own thing. So instead of static and dynamic, I would describe things as static and organic. And this is the kind of thing that would make a part organic. But yeah, the way I describe a vocal makes a transformer sing. I think when you push enough voltage into a transformer, it starts to resonate its iron core. And with something like a vocal, it has a very distinct... In fact, I'm just going to solo... I'm not going to solo a vocal, but I'm going to bring up an FFT on the screen here. You'll see when I play this vocal, at 1 or 2 very definite spikes in the audio.
Until the child comes forth and takes you into the cloud.
You see on that big power note at the end there especially, I'll turn off True Iron. Oh, it's already off. And you'll see one of those spikes really stand out and another couple just after it. And that's the power in the vocal with a couple of big harmonics. See, that one was way bigger than the other two. If I turn on True Iron, hopefully they'll be more even. Yeah, that one there, that third spike, which is the second harmonic. Let's turn it kind of saturates, and then all the ones further up saturate a little bit more. That's what happens when a transformer gets saturated. It doesn't necessarily sound like distortion, but a lot of like big, well-produced albums, the main vocal has that transformer saturation where I can hear in that vocal almost a zipping sound where there's a main melody, may go la 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 la, and over the top I can hear on its own. That would be horrible, but mixed in, that transformer saturation gives a really kind of polished sound. It's hard to describe, but if I just crush this all the way, that is transformer saturation taken to the nth degree. If I mix that in, just... That's arguably too saturated. But you see how that second spike there, louder again. If I play...
Until the child comes forth and takes you into the cloud.
So that's just under half 50-50 mix. And let's turn the strength of the non-linearity again.
Until the child comes forth and takes you into the cloud.
So that sounds like a lot of albums' distortions that I know on say a vocal distortion where you wouldn't want a guitar amp distortion. I think I can hear, yeah, unpredictability of induction curves working against each other. Yeah, I mean, that is probably more technical than I would have described it, but yes, very much so. That it's not like where you've just got something and you're clipping it. It's very, yeah, I think organic is the word. If I was to back that crush off.
Until the child comes forth and takes you into the clouds.
You hear that distortion in there. I'm going to bypass that. And you'll hear how much more powerful it sounds with the distortion.
Until the child comes forth and takes you into the clouds.
And if you listen to oh, thanks Shane, complimenting the vocals. It's like, I hate the sound of my own voice as much as anybody else, but I was doing the vocal demo video that you may have seen where I was comparing the sound of different rooms using the same microphone. Anyway, I needed to do a vocal. There it is. But if you listen to the multi-track stems of a lot of modern rock and metal albums and just separate the vocal out, you may be surprised at just how much more distorted and saturated it is than you thought it was. Because when you blend that in with the rest of an album, it's it kind of drops into the background there. So let's listen to this in the mix without.
Until the child comes forth and takes you into the clouds.
And with.
Until the child comes forth and takes you into the clouds.
Did you notice then that that really sat in the mix? That really came forward, and just with this True Iron saturation there, it just made a space for itself in the mix. And the fact that on both of these it had exactly the same signal chain, which was an Empirical Labs distressor, an EQ not doing much apart from maybe dipping a bit of really low mid out, another compressor, and then a bit of air. These were identical. Oh, and a de-esser, and then that EQ there not doing anything, that's just showing us. So the de-esser's a de-esser's a de-esser. So without that again.
Until the child comes forth and takes you.
On its own, the track sounds clinical, it sounds clean, it sounds well recorded. And with True Iron.
Until the child comes forth and takes you into the clouds.
Cool. Now that's a bit loud, so I'm going to take it down a little, and that should, if I knock a decibel off it, still sit in the mix.
Until the child comes forth and takes you.
Saturation, things fit in mix as well. So, last but not least, let's go back to another section where I don't have to listen to my own voice for a minute, because there's nothing on the master bus over here. So, let's run everything through another copy of True Iron. I mean, it's let's just look at my processor usage. It's not very high. I've put one of these on the master bus now. 0.13% processor usage. How hilarious is that? This is on my laptop, which is an older Haswell generation 4800 MQ laptop, which is, it's a laptop processor. It's an older processor. This is my working mix rig away from the studio, so it's not nearly as powerful, and still this plugin uses less than 0.2% of the processor. That's crazy. So let's just listen to the mix with, I like to turn this strength up. I don't even listen to it before I turn the strength up because I like that transformer sound. No crush, just to start with, because this is going to be on the entire mix, and this might be quite powerful because it's got a lot being sent to it. It's got a lot of input going in already, and we don't want the mix to sound lifeless by giving it too much. So let's try it without and then turn it on. So that's at Unity. So it sounds louder, but it's a perceptive thing. The non-linearities must be making it appear louder. If I put that on boost mode and then crank the crush, then of course it would be louder. You can do that with this plugin. That switch makes that possible, but that says Unity, so it's not adding any more volume. And I would imagine with the Unity, as you push the crush, it then brings the output level down to match, rather than allowing it to get louder. And let's just try this on Euro, because that's what was suggested to me, because we probably want a bit less saturation on the master bus. This is bypassed, and this is on. On, off. How's that compared to the tape machine sim? What, like Slate's tape machine sim? it's just different. In quite a few cases, I'd probably be quite happy to use both of them in tandem, maybe a bit of each. But a good tape machine is designed to have relatively linear sounding transformers, and a lot of the sound of a tape machine comes from the saturation of the tape, which, let's just try that on the master bus. So this is Slate Virtual Tape. I'll drive it pretty hard. And off. And on. And then that's it. So they both sound good, and arguably they both make a mixed sound better. A tape machine generally tends to give you a low frequency boost, no matter what, because of what's called head bump, which is where the tape saturates. The top end on a tape also tends to soften off, and the transformers just isolated don't do either of those things really, as far as I know, but they seem to make things a bit more mid-forward. I may go easy on using the tape and a little bit less easy on the True Iron. Transformer seems more defined. Yes, that's one of the sonic signatures of tape, is that it's less defined, and to a lot of people in a lot of situations that's a good thing. I like definition. I like 70s style definition. Like, one of my favourite sounding albums is Michael Jackson's Thriller, for example, and one of the ways that, say, the drums on Billie Jean sound crisp is, I know from reading about it through an interview with Bruce Sweden, that they tracked all the drums, then made a copy straight away of the drums onto a different tape, and they worked on the different tape with all the other tracks, because the more and more and more times you use a tape, the softer it gets, the mushier it gets, less defined. And then right at the end, they got this mix of the drums, which they'd, really pushed the console and everything. And they put them back into the mix in Billie Jean with almost as little tape use as possible. And yes, it was recorded on tape, but they practically only ever used the tape once. And that meant that they had more transformer, arguably, and less iron, and that sounds great. Strength is working like a threshold parameter. No, not really. Just had someone join the chat. The strength, it's hard to describe. I mean, maybe if... Oh. Little Easter egg from Kazrog there. If I click on the Kazrog icon, I get an output knob in the corner. That's cool. I suppose the idea is that you don't use that most of the time, but it's nice for that to be there, just in case. But yeah, the strength seems to be almost exaggerating the model of the transformers, because a perfect transformer, which would be the strength down here somewhere, won't have any sound to it because it will be theoretically perfect. With a higher saturation or a higher transformer strength, it will sound less perfect, and so in terms of people who like the sound of transformers, more good. If I turn the strength down. So that sounds much more bassy now because the low end saturation from the transformers being fed into the tape machine. But yeah, so I think one of the reasons I'm not using the tape machine as much, especially on the master bus these days, is I tend to saturate my low end on each track. And I find that I don't need any assistance from the tape machine at the end. I don't need any more. I ended up with these overly flubby, tubby kind of mixes with too much bass if I then add a tape machine on because of the way that I mix. Although quite a lot I'll use a tape machine on things like acoustic guitar where I want those perfect crisp transients to be softened off. I want that low end to be a little richer, but not necessarily like an EQ where you can hear it. But yeah, I will be using this.
Takes you into the clouds.
I'll be using that a lot more. In fact, let's also try throwing True Iron on all my effects. So I'm gonna not necessarily crush them at ×2, but I am going to have all my reverbs and my delay saturated with transformers.
Takes you into the clouds.
And see what that does. So turn them off. And back on. You may be able to see on my effects there I've got an EQ on each one of them, and that's just shelving the low end off. So I might put True Iron before that, because if I have too much low end going on my reverbs and delays, that can interfere with the rest of the mix. Strength is the tolerance of the virtual transformer, is what he said. But you can increase or decrease tendency to saturate from there when you boost or cut respectively. Huh. Yeah, okay, so yeah. I suppose if I'm using this to saturate, then I would kind of distort the characteristics, but let's see how this sounds with lots more True Iron in there.
Takes you into the clouds. Takes you into the clouds.
Awesome. Okay, I'm quickly going to switch, if it'll load up, to an acoustic track, which we've looked at before, just to have a quick look at and see how this sounds on things like acoustic guitars. But if anyone's got any questions, now's a good time, because we're pretty much kind of wrapping up here and just trying this on a slightly different genre. But yeah, if anyone's got anything they'd like to ask, we are live, so by all means, jump in the chat and ask away. Come on, come on, come on. Load up all the plugins. God, this mix had so much plugin. This is a band that I've used mixes for on these live tutorials before, by the way. This is the Chief of Seattle, who are not from Seattle, they're from Manchester, England, but really nice guys. Question from Heinz Hammer. Would you personally always go with 100% wet if used on the master? Seems like Crush Mix suits my workflow more on single tracks. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I would be very much experimenting with it, really, but I tend to go by ear, really, and if... Oh, this may be... I might have to close sticky notes and maybe restart something here. I seem to run up against some sort of issue. But, yeah. The whole crush and mix thing is probably something I would only do out of the ones that I showed you, maybe on a kick drum and a vocal in my usual work. I'm usually an all-in kind of guy with that kind of thing. Where was it? I would usually personally use a bit less than I think I need and in 100% mode, because you tend to find that as you cascade these kind of things, so if I had something like True Iron on the guitars, then the guitar bus, then the master bus, you think it sounds great, and by the end of it, it sounds like a distorted mess because you've kind of tripled what you thought you were doing. Yeah, it's an interesting one because my workflow very much depends on each song. My workflow definitely is, serve the song. That's my way of thinking. Why is it taking so long to load? Am I having some sort of... Oh, it's loading up. See, it's very, very rare that I get any kind of issues with Reaper. I think it's just taking a long time to... Yeah, it's just taking a long time to load. There we go. Yeah, compared to Pro Tools, which will just give you hell. Yeah. Any more questions while we wait for the slow, crushing inevitability of loading screens? Ooh, Melodyne. Hello, you old friend. Surprised I'm able to talk at all today. I went to the dentist earlier. First filling. God, that was awful. Right, here we go. There's a lot going on here. Let's just have a listen to this. Right. So, in hindsight, now this sounds really nice, but how about recording an album with guitar plugins? Sure, why not? I mean, personally, I wouldn't because I have the option not to, but I'm not like, say, Glenn Fricker, who's like, get a real amp! The Thermionik amps are great. Honestly, most of the realism is in getting the transformer saturation and the cabinets right. So I'm a little biased, but I would say use the Thermionik amps by Kazrog. I mean, like I was saying before, this stream isn't sponsored or paid for by Kazrog or anything. I just like the plugins, and I bought the full Thermionik collection before I'd ever talked to Shane from Kazrog. I went out and just bought them all. And yeah, I've never been a fan of static impulse responses, which is why I generally don't use his IR loader recabinets. Not because it's bad, it's because I'm not a fan of static IRs. But I work with 2 Notes audio engineering, and I have cabinets by Zilla that I've made impulses of that you'll find in the 2 Notes store. And they're €8 ago, so if you can't afford guitar amps, then the Thermionik, I think the entire Thermionik bundle's now $69, which, yeah, that's not bad going. And $8 for one of my cabinets. And then True Iron, which is, what is it, $39? For this thing that really brings it to life. Between them, you couldn't even get like a tiny rubbish tube guitar amp for that. You just couldn't. So, and of course Reaper is very inexpensive. And there's all sorts of extra plugins you can get that you don't have to pay for that are very good. So let's have a look at this. So these drums, these sound quite sterile to me now. So let's put True Iron on the kick. There's instantly some weight to this kick. I'll turn this off. And on. And off. And again, I'll drop that on the snare. Maybe crush the snare a little just to get some more weight. And I'll drop it on those toms as well. and let's put True Iron before this Devil Lock compressor, which is like a really heavy compressor that I have on the drum overheads. And let's push this really quite hard. And on Euro mode, why not? And back the mix off a bit, see what that sounds like without and with. Let's get to a busy bit. And then with. And without. So those hi-hats are already more crisp with the high end kind of saturating there. Let's put another True Iron on the overall drum bus. So that bass sounds a bit anemic. Oh look! True Iron. Bit more linear. So this is it before. That's it now. So this electric guitar had a bit of a bump and a bit of a mid scoop there. Let's see what happens if we run True Iron into that. And without. And with. Nice. So this is supposed to be a really nice sounding acoustic guitar. So let's make it a bit less nice with True Iron. That's interesting. Really crushing that with 24 dBs of gain doesn't sound as distorted as I thought it would, even with the strength quite high up. Let's try that on and off. Off. And on. Wow. Let's move over to the next guitar, which is actually a DI. Didn't really want to use a DI for this particular guitar, but the way that we recorded it, it was the logical kind of thing. So I'm going to stick True Iron after the tape machine and before this crazy stereo plug-in here. And let's see how this DI sounds. Maybe with the Euro. That's really good here, because what that's doing, what I'm hearing, is this this DI guitar's got a lot of that pizzo zing 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 going on. As soon as I turn this on, it brings up the mid and kind of caps a bit of that zing off. So, without and with. Let's see how this whole guitar group sounds now. So good. Let's get to the main vocal, because this one I've processed quite hard, because Anne-Marie, the vocalist, has an interesting voice.
A static station, but you are no longer around.
I tried distorting the voice quite hard, and it didn't seem to work. It didn't fit her voice. In fact, there was quite a lot of processing going on. So I'm going to use True Iron, and I'm going to see what happens if I really hit this hard.
A static station, but you are no longer around. And I'm still waiting on your name on that
And off.
sound. A static station, but you are
And
no
on.
longer around. And I'm still waiting on your name on that.
That sounds so good. I'm going to move that before virtual mix rack, because that'll be if there's any compression. Yeah, there is. I'll put that before the compressor to see where on that should be. Yeah, if she sings a big note, we want to hear more transformer saturation.
A static station, but you are no longer around.
Yeah, maybe I don't want that. I'm going to put that at the end instead.
A static station, but you are no longer around.
Much nicer. I think that's one of the things that the issues that I was having with Anne-Marie's voice is she is very dynamic, and that any of the processing that I was using, any of the kind of analog saturators were going crazy on the big notes because she's got this real kind of upper mid-range in her voice that's quite unusual. But let's have a look at the backing vocals, and then we're going to listen to everything together. So we've got that typical kind of very thinned out 70s thing. So I'm going to really hit this. With a boost. And off. Turn it down a little to match. Now let's have a listen to this chorus with everything going. It's almost encouraging me with that to now add a bit of low end back in her voice. There's a nice little tip, by the way. If you're using a de-esser, I use 2 de-essers in a row that are quite gentle but at different frequencies. I picked that up from one of Adele's producers because they actually use the Waves de-esser, which is quite old, but they use that on things like Rolling in the Deep. And hey, that won a Grammy, right? That album did, at least. Yeah, so there's some merit in that. And yeah, let's just play this one more time with all. I'll put a True Iron on the master bus as well, because why not? See how quick I can turn all these off. So many of them. So many. Safe to say that I'm going to be using this a lot in pretty much everything that I do going forward. A lot of guys have, like, analog channel strips that they use on every channel, I tend to be quite selective about what plugins I use per channel, but I think the True Iron is here to stay and is going to be on a lot of my tracks. So that pretty much rounds out today. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and thank you everybody who watches this after the fact. Sorry I can't see questions, but time goes in one direction. Stay tuned for more of these kind of videos. So the heavy stuff that we were playing before, I'm going to be doing another video that I think's got 14 different VST guitar amps compared now, because the last one I did had 8. Then I'm going to do another version of that video that also includes real amps. Then I'm going to do one that's comparing different power stages with the same real amp. Then I'm going to do one that's cold tubes versus hot tubes with the exact same setup, and whether that makes a difference. And so that's just what's coming up. There's a video I'm going to be doing soon about subwoofers in the studio and whether you should get one. Spoilers, I'm getting 2. But that's going to be an interesting one, but I have to wait for those to arrive. I've got review videos coming out for the Aston microphone Starlight and Origin. I've got the ID22 and the ID44, which I've got down here, which I have to do reviews on. But again, spoilers, these are great. I'm still trying to put together the Slate ML2 full demo, because I've only got 2 of those, and trying to room big enough and soundproof enough to be able to play that without the walls coming down. That's why I use a Mesa 5050, because I can get to that point of tube saturation without anybody having to die. I mean, if the MP1's your thing, cool. I had the MP1 Classic for a while, but I sold that straight on because it wasn't really working for me. But the concept of things like the MP1 still lives on. I've got the 2 notes preamps, which are actually in pedal format, but could well have been in rack format, except that that's out of fashion now. There's all sorts of stuff. Yeah, so many videos. Tell me about it. I've got to actually try and finish all these, get them edited. I've got 2 videos which I was in the middle of editing today, which were for the Roland Blues Cube, which was actually kind of cool, and the tone capsules that come with it. And oh, the More Me setup with single headphones for musicians. That's another video that I need to finish. Yeah, so the radar is working perfectly well with that. Just so you guys are aware, my studio runs with an RME RADAT, which has 4 ADAT inputs and 4 ADAT outputs, which at 44 or 48 kilohertz is 32 in, 32 out. I don't use 32 outputs, so what I've done is I've bought an old ADAT machine, which can take one of these ADAT cables and give me 8 separate outputs, which is 4 stereo outputs if you think about it. That's going to a headphone amp that's got a different input for each channel, and that's now working pretty well. And Reaper can come on, brain. Blah, blah, blah. Reaper can have this web interface now that comes bundled with it, where on a laptop or an iPad or an iPhone, you can then have custom mix of your own. So I'm going to be doing that in the studio. I'm going to be giving musicians an iPad that's in like a rubber bulletproof case and be like, there, do your own mix. So if anyone says, oh, can I have more snare in the headphones? I can just say, do it yourself. And it will be user friendly. It will be easy. That's a video that I'm going to have to do. I've not been in the studio very much for the last few weeks, because if you're not aware, my partner just gave birth to a lovely baby girl. So for the last 2.5, 3 weeks, I've been mostly at home helping out with the baby. I've been managing to edit some of the videos that I already had all the filming in the pipeline for. Can I do a plug-in cabinet review? Yes, that's going to be another one down the line, definitely. But that goes into the list, the big massive list. So there's so much more coming from me and from the studio. It's just a matter of being able to actually put all these videos together, finish them and get them out. And I'm trying to release 2 a week. This was an extra bonus video, which is means there's going to be 3 this week. There's going to be one coming out on Friday about how to get your drummer to play in time with a click. And it's not necessarily the drummer's fault. Being a producer who plays some drums rather than a drummer who does some producing, I've always struggled to play to a click, not for lack of practice, but I find I can't hear it. And then you turn the headphones up and you still can't hear it, but you're somehow going deaf. So I look at options to do with noise isolation, using different clicks that you can pick up. Anyway, there's so many videos to come, and I'm going to be working on them all over the next few weeks and releasing at least 2 a week. And thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. And thank you for your support. If you're not already helping us out on Patreon, then I would appreciate you giving that a look, because that's the kind of thing that helps us to do this rather than have more clients in the studio, because we want to do this full time, really, and share what we know with you. So thank you, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. See you soon.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.